The polished halls of the Galactic Defense Academy gleamed under the triple suns of Proxima Centauri, and I couldn't help but run my primary tentacle along the familiar wall ridges as I made my way to the grand lecture hall. 15 cycles had passed since I last walked these corridors as a fresh-faced cadet, back when my scales still had that embarrassing purple tint of youth. Commander Kax'ul, a young Centaurian cadet, snapped to attention, her antenna whirring in excitement. "The entire senior class has assembled for your lecture, sir." I adjusted my ceremonial sash, making sure all 27 combat medals were properly aligned. "At ease, cadet. Though I must say your batch seems far more punctual than mine ever was." The corners of my mouth flaps twitched in what I hoped was a reassuring smile. Even after all these years of working with various species, facial expressions remained a challenge. As I approached the entrance to the lecture hall, the ambient chatter from within ceased immediately. 300 pairs of eyes, antennae, sensory stalks, and various other optical organs focused on me. The prestigious Galactic Defense Academy had certainly become more diverse since my days as a student. "Good morning, future defenders of the galaxy," I began, my voice resonating through the acoustically perfect chamber. "I am Commander Kax'ul, veteran of the Rigel campaign, former tactical officer of the GDS Indomitable, and survivor of what your history texts now call the First Contact War." A collective murmur rippled through the audience. My secondary heart quickened its pace as memories of those days flooded back. The medals on my chest suddenly felt heavier. But I'm not here to bore you with statistics about our victories, or recite the same tactical analyses you've already studied. No, I'm here to tell you about the most terrifying, unpredictable, and absolutely brilliant species I've ever encountered in my 40 cycles of service. I paused, noting how several instructors in the back row shifted uncomfortably. They knew what was coming. "I'm here to tell you about humans." The word sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. A young arthropodian in the front row raised one of her limbs. "Commander, with all due respect, we've already completed our xenobiology courses. Humans are classified as Class 3 Deathworlders, persistence predators with remarkable endurance but limited technological advancement prior to first contact." I couldn't suppress a laugh, which probably sounded more like a wheeze to most species present. "Oh, young one, those clinical descriptions in your textbooks? They don't even scratch the surface. I lived with a human during the war, fought alongside them, nearly died because of them, and then was saved by them in the most absurd way possible." The arthropodian's mandibles clicked in confusion. Perfect. They were hooked. But before I tell you about my former roommate and how they accidentally started a revolution on 6 different planets by introducing something called coffee to the galaxy, let me paint you a picture of what it was like when I first encountered humanity. I activated the holographic display, bringing up an image of Earth. Such an unassuming little blue marble, hiding what I now knew to be the most wonderfully chaotic species in the known universe. Your textbooks will tell you about their physical capabilities, their social structures, their military tactics. But none of that prepared me for the day I met Lieutenant Amanda Torres and learned that everything I knew about warfare, survival, and the laws of common sense was about to change forever. The holographic display shifted to show the military barracks of Station Omega, where it all began. Several cadets leaned forward in their seats, their attention fully captured. "The first thing you should know about humans," I continued, "is that they have absolutely no concept of proper sleeping cycles. When Lieutenant Torres first arrived at my quarters, I thought she was suffering from a severe neurological disorder." A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. No, really. Here was this being, standing at attention, introducing herself as my new roommate, while carrying something she called a coffee maker and enough stimulant packets to send our entire medical bay into panic mode. I remember asking her about proper hibernation protocols, and she just laughed. I adjusted my posture, mimicking the human stance I'd seen so many times. She said, and I quote, "Oh buddy, sleep is for the weak. I've got 3 tactical manuals to memorize by tomorrow, and this baby," she patted that strange machine, "is going to help me do it." The memory made my scales ripple with amusement. Now, you've all studied human physiology, but let me tell you something they don't put in the textbooks. Humans don't just resist sleep, they actively fight it like it's a personal enemy. And they have weapons for this fight, terrible weapons called energy drinks and triple espresso shots. A young Nexilian raised their appendage. But Commander, surely their combat effectiveness would be compromised without proper rest cycles. Hey, that's exactly what I thought. I even filed a formal complaint with our commanding officer, concerned that my roommate was clearly suffering from battle fatigue before we'd even started training. The response I received simply said, "Working as intended. Welcome to joint operations with humans." The hologram shifted to show the station's mess hall. But sleep patterns were just the beginning of my cultural shock. Let me tell you about human food habits. You see, most species have clear nutritional requirements and strict dietary schedules. Humans, they'll eat anything, at any time, for any reason, or sometimes for no reason at all. I gestured to the image of Amanda sitting at the mess hall table, surrounded by an assortment of containers. Lieutenant Torres had something she called a snack drawer inside were preserved food items from Earth that violated every safety protocol we had. There were things called hot Cheetos that were neither hot in temperature nor, as I later learned, made from actual cheese. And she would consume these while reading mission briefings, during tactical planning, even in the middle of our sleep cycle. The audience was fully engaged now, some taking notes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But the real shock came during our first joint training exercise. We were running combat simulations, and I noticed Lieutenant Torres hadn't touched her standard issue nutrient packets. Instead, she pulled out something called a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The sight of it nearly caused our commanding officer to faint. I paused for dramatic effect. You see, in the middle of a crucial tactical exercise, this human was consuming what appeared to be crushed legumes and fruit paste trapped between slices of processed grain. When asked about this breach of protocol, she simply offered to share it with the entire command staff. The hologram showed the aftermath of that incident, with several high-ranking officers cautiously examining their own sandwiches while Amanda beamed with pride. That sandwich incident, as ridiculous as it sounds, actually led to a complete overhaul of our joint forces field ration protocols. Because, as we later discovered, human food might look and smell strange, but it had something our nutrient packets lacked. They called it morale boost. A serious look crossed my features. And that, cadets, was my first lesson about humans. Never, ever underestimate their ability to turn what you perceive as chaos into an advantage. Those strange sleeping habits? They made Lieutenant Torres available for every emergency shift. That weird food? It became a diplomatic tool that built stronger bonds between species than any official protocol ever could. The image changed one final time, showing Amanda and me sitting in our shared quarters, she with her coffee, me with my traditional nutrient solution. But perhaps the most important thing I learned during those early days was that humans don't just break rules, they question why those rules exist in the first place. And sometimes, just sometimes, their questions lead to better answers than we ever had before. The holographic display flickered to show the massive training grounds of Station Omega. Several cadets straightened in their seats, recognizing the infamous gauntlet course. Now, I continued, my voice taking on an amused tone. You all know about the gauntlet. That lovely little obstacle course designed to test the limits of every species in our alliance. What you might not know is that we had to rebuild it 3 times during the first month of joint training with humans. 3 times. The audience exchanged confused glances. The first incident occurred during what should have been a standard endurance test. The course was designed with rest stations every 500 meters, accounting for the various biological needs of different species. Lieutenant Torres took one look at these stations and asked, "What happens if we skip them?" I shook my head, remembering the chaos that followed. Our instructors explained that the stations were mandatory, that they were carefully calculated based on known biological limitations. Torres nodded, smiled politely, and then proceeded to run the entire 10-kilometer course without stopping once. A gasp rippled through the audience. Oh, but it gets better. When she finished, barely even breathing hard, she turned around and ran it again. Her explanation, she said, and I quote, "I needed to warm up first. That was just my practice run." The hologram shifted to show medical readouts. Our doctors were convinced she was dying. They had never seen such elevated heart rates sustained for so long. While they were preparing emergency procedures, Torres was asking if she could try for a third lap to beat her previous time. A Vulparian cadet raised their paw. "But Commander, surely this violated safety protocols." "Protocols," I laughed. "Let me tell you about protocols. During our second week, we ran combat simulations. Standard stuff: defend the objective, maintain position, work as a team. The simulation pitted us against automated defense systems. Pretty straightforward, right?" The hologram showed the training arena. Wrong. Torres looked at our carefully planned defensive positions and said they were, in her words, boring. Instead, she suggested we try something called parkour. I gestured to the image of Amanda leaping between platforms. Now, most species understand the concept of moving from point A to point B. Humans? They treat gravity like it's a personal challenge. Torres showed us how to run up walls, roll under barriers, and do something called a backflip, which I'm still convinced violates several laws of physics. The audience watched in amazement as the hologram played footage of the training session. The simulation parameters couldn't handle it. The targeting systems were designed to predict normal movement patterns, but there was nothing normal about a human ricocheting off walls like some sort of caffeinated pinball. The entire system crashed, and we had to rewrite the combat algorithms from scratch. I paused, letting that sink in. But here's the real kicker. Our commanding officers were ready to cite her for equipment damage and protocol violations. Then they saw the efficiency ratings. Torres's methods, as insane as they looked, had cut our response times in half. Her vertical maneuvers reduced our exposure to enemy fire by 60%. She had literally broken the rules into something better. The hologram switched to show another training scenario. Then came the infamous night training incident. We were running stealth operations, practicing infiltration techniques. Standard procedure was to use cover of darkness, move slowly, minimize noise. Torres had a different idea. I couldn't help but chuckle at the memory. She taught us about something humans call social engineering. Instead of sneaking around, she walked right up to the front gate of the target facility, carrying 3 boxes of what she called pizza. Told the guard she had a delivery order. They actually let her in. No one had ever considered that sometimes the best way to be invisible is to hide in plain sight. The recording showed Amanda casually strolling past security checkpoints while confused guards examined the pizza boxes. The best part? After completing the mission objective, she came back and actually shared the pizza with the guards. Said it would be rude not to. Turned the whole thing into an impromptu cultural exchange. The facility commander was simultaneously furious and impressed. I gestured to a new series of images showing training statistics. By the end of that month, every combat instructor had to revise their teaching methods. Because humans? They don't just think outside the box. They take the box, turn it into a makeshift shelter, use it for cover, and then probably try to surf down a hill on it just to see if they can. The hologram displayed a series of revised training protocols. We had to create entirely new safety guidelines, not because humans were reckless, mind you, but because their definition of impossible was dramatically different from ours. Where we saw limitations, they saw suggestions. Where we had carefully calculated boundaries, they saw opportunities. I turned back to the audience, noting their wide-eyed expressions. And that, cadets, was when we began to understand something crucial about humans. Their greatest strength isn't their endurance or their creativity, or even their bizarre ability to turn anything into a competition. It's their stubborn refusal to accept that something can't be done just because everyone says it can't. The final image showed Amanda teaching a group of alien soldiers how to make paper airplanes out of mission briefings. They force us to question our assumptions. They make us look at problems from angles we never considered. And sometimes, just sometimes, their absolutely insane methods turn out to be exactly what we needed all along. The atmosphere in the lecture hall grew tense as I brought up the next hologram, showing the rugged terrain of Rigel 7. Several of the older instructors in the back straightened their postures, recognizing the infamous battleground. Everything I've told you so far might sound amusing, perhaps even absurd, I said, my voice growing serious. But what happened on Rigel 7, That's when we truly understood what humans were capable of. The hologram zoomed in on a rocky canyon system. Our mission was simple: extract valuable intelligence from an abandoned research facility. Standard operation, minimal resistance expected. We had a squad of 12 Force Centaurians, 3 Vulparians, 2 Nexilians, 2 humans, and myself. Lieutenant Torres was our tactical specialist. I pointed to the canyon walls. Intelligence suggested a small enemy presence, maybe 20 guards. We had superior training, better equipment, and a solid plan. Everything went perfectly for exactly 6 minutes and 23 seconds. The hologram showed the massive ambush that awaited us. 200 hostile combatants, not 20. They had sonic disruptors, pulse cannons, and worst of all, gravity manipulators. We were pinned down, our communications jammed, and our extraction point was compromised. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Standard protocol in this situation was clear: activate emergency beacons and wait for reinforcements. Estimated survival time under sustained enemy fire? 15 minutes. Estimated time for reinforcements to arrive? 40 minutes. I let that sink in before continuing. That's when Lieutenant Torres started laughing. Not the nervous kind of laughter you might expect in a hopeless situation. No, this was the kind of laugh that made our enemies pause their assault, because it was so unexpected. The hologram showed Amanda's vital signs during that moment. While the rest of us were calculating our survival odds, she was rummaging through her pack, pulling out what looked like random items. A bottle of something called hot sauce, 3 emergency flares, a packet of sugar, and her precious coffee maker. Some cadets exchanged confused glances. She looked at me with that terrifying human grin and said, "Remember how I told you humans used to hunt? Well, we didn't always have fancy weapons. Sometimes we just had to make do with what we had." The hologram displayed the ensuing chaos in detailed sequences. First, she modified the coffee maker to process the hot sauce instead of water. Did you know that human hot sauce contains something called capsaicin when aerosolized and heated? It creates a highly effective riot control agent. She pressurized the machine using the emergency oxygen tanks from our suits. I gestured to the next sequence. While the enemy was dealing with what she called spicy air, Torres had already moved to phase 2. She mixed the sugar with components from our emergency flares. The resulting compound, when ignited, created a smoke screen that completely blinded their targeting systems. The audience watched in astonishment as the battle continued to unfold. But here's the truly insane part. Remember those gravity manipulators the enemy was using? Torres figured out their resonance frequency by, and I quote, "the way they made her teeth buzz. She calibrated our sonic communicators to match that frequency, creating a feedback loop that turned their own weapons against them." I shook my head in remembered disbelief. In less than 10 minutes, she had transformed our hopeless last stand into complete chaos. The enemy forces, who had us outgunned and outnumbered, were now dealing with chemical irritants, impaired visibility, and malfunctioning equipment. The hologram showed Amanda leading the charge through enemy lines. That's when she shouted something that I'll never forget. Time for some good old-fashioned psychological warfare. She started playing music through our communication systems. Something called "Welcome to the Jungle" by a human band named Guns N' Roses. Several instructors in the back row visibly winced at the memory. The combination of blaring music, environmental hazards, and our synchronized attack pattern completely shattered enemy morale. They had prepared for a military engagement. Instead, they got what Torres later described as a mix between a rave party and a pepper spray incident. I brought up the final battle statistics. In 23 minutes, we had neutralized or captured the entire enemy force. Not only did we complete our original mission, but we also acquired significantly more intelligence than expected. The enemy commander actually surrendered directly to Torres, saying he had to meet the person responsible for turning his elite force into, as he put it, sneezing, crying, dancing chaos. The hologram showed the aftermath, with Amanda casually making coffee while medics treated the captured enemies. The official after-action report took 3 weeks to write because no one could figure out how to classify what had happened. How do you explain that a standard-issue coffee maker became a weapon of mass confusion? That someone turned condiments and emergency supplies into tactical advantages? I looked around the lecture hall, noting the mix of awe and disbelief on the faces before me. The Rigel Incident changed everything. Every combat manual had to be rewritten. Every tactical doctrine had to be reconsidered. Because humans showed us that the difference between victory and defeat isn't always about having superior numbers or technology. Sometimes it's about being so unpredictable that your enemies can't even process what's happening. The hologram showed the commendation ceremony that followed. Lieutenant Torres received the highest military honors from 6 different species. The citation read for unprecedented tactical innovation and the successful demonstration that kitchen appliances can, under proper circumstances, be classified as military assets. I paused, letting my scales shift to a more reflective shade. But the real lesson of Rigel 7 wasn't about winning against impossible odds. It was about understanding that humans don't just think differently, they fundamentally change how everyone around them thinks. They make the impossible seem obvious in hindsight. The holographic display settled back to the present moment, and I surveyed the stunned faces before me. A Nexilian cadet in the front row had forgotten to close all 4 of her mouths. Questions I asked, knowing the floodgates were about to open. The first appendage shot up immediately. A young Vulparian, his fur still showing signs of adolescent patterning. "Commander, with all respect, this can't be real. Using a coffee maker as a weapon? That must violate at least 15 safety protocols." 16. Actually, I replied, checking my datapad. We counted. The Safety Council had to create a new classification just for human improvised tactics. They called it the Torres Protocol, which basically states if a human says they have a plan, evacuate all non-essential personnel immediately. Another appendage raised, this time from a Centaurian. "But sir, what happened to Lieutenant Torres after the Rigel incident?" I grinned, bringing up a new hologram. She got promoted, obviously. Then she started teaching advanced unconventional warfare at this very academy. Her first lesson? How to turn standard-issue bootlaces into repelling equipment. The maintenance department still hasn't recovered from that semester. The questions came rapid fire now. Is it true humans can digest almost anything? Well, I chuckled. Torres once won a bet by eating something called a gas station sushi. Our medical team still uses the incident reports as horror stories to scare new recruits. "Commander, we learned that humans require regular sleep cycles to function." Hey, tell that to Lieutenant Torres during what she called finals week. She stayed awake for 4 days straight, surviving on something called Red Bull and spite. Our scientists still can't explain it. A particularly brave arthropodian raised their limb. "Sir, in our xenobiology class, they said humans are relatively fragile compared to other species. No natural armor, no enhanced strength." Yes, I interrupted. The classic misconception. Let me tell you about the time Torres' arm wrestled a hydraulic loading dock robot because, and I quote, "someone said I couldn't, she didn't win. But she did manage to blow out 3 of the robot's servo motors through sheer stubbornness." The hologram showed various training footage. You see, the problem with studying humans is that we keep trying to classify them according to our standard metrics. But humans, they don't care about your metrics. They don't care about what should or shouldn't be possible. A senior instructor in the back spoke up. "Commander Kax'ul, surely you're embellishing these stories for dramatic effect." I wish I sighed, bringing up official incident reports. Here's the documentation for the time Torres taught an entire platoon of Nexilians how to use food fights as combat training, or the time she reprogrammed a maintenance bot to play something called the Imperial March whenever our commanding officer entered a room. The laughter in the hall was interrupted by another question. "But sir, how do we prepare for working with such unconventional allies?" I let my scales shift to a thoughtful blue. That's the neat part, you don't. You can't prepare for humans. They take pride in being unpredictable. The best you can do is learn to adapt, to accept that sometimes the craziest solution might be the right one. The hologram showed various scenes of humans working alongside alien species. You'll learn that their greatest strength isn't their physical capabilities or their technology. It's their ability to look at a completely hopeless situation and say, well, that's just your opinion. And the coffee, someone asked. Is it really as powerful as they say? Let me put it this way, I replied. After the Rigel Incident, coffee was classified as a strategic resource. There are 3 separate treaties governing its distribution in military installations. And yes, Lieutenant Torres did try to argue that this technically made her coffee maker a weapon of mass destruction. The laughter that filled the hall was genuine now, tinged with a new understanding. These cadets were beginning to grasp what I had learned years ago, that sometimes the most effective warriors aren't the strongest or the most advanced, but the ones who simply refuse to accept conventional limitations. As the laughter subsided, I dimmed the holographic display and let my scales shift to a deeper, more serious shade of blue. The atmosphere in the lecture hall changed with it, as if the very air could sense the weight of what I was about to share. You know, I began, my voice quieter now. When humans first joined the Galactic Alliance, many species laughed, some even protested, a species that had barely mastered faster than light travel, whose longest space journey had been to their own moon. How could they possibly contribute to our sophisticated military doctrine? I brought up one final hologram, showing the original signing of the Alliance Treaty. What none of us understood then, what we couldn't have possibly grasped, was that humans weren't behind us in development. They were simply on an entirely different path. While we perfected energy weapons, they were mastering the art of using anything as a weapon. While we developed complex battle strategies, they were learning to turn chaos itself into an advantage. The image shifted to show current military training programs across the galaxy. Look at our modern combat doctrine. Every single section has been influenced by human thinking. We no longer just teach standard protocols, we teach adaptability. We don't just focus on using equipment properly, we learn how to improvise with whatever's available. And most importantly, we've learned that sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one. A young cadet raised their appendage hesitantly. Sir, are you saying that humans have been secretly guiding our military development? I couldn't help but laugh. Secretly? Oh no, there was nothing secret about it. They did it right in front of us, usually while making jokes about it. The real secret was that we were so focused on their technological limitations that we completely missed their greatest strength. Their ability to change how everyone around them thinks. The hologram displayed a series of technological and tactical innovations, each credited to human-alien collaboration. You see, humans didn't need to catch up to our level of development. Instead, they showed us entirely new ways of approaching problems. They taught us that sometimes the best technology isn't the most advanced, but the most reliable. That the best strategy isn't the most complex, but the most adaptable. I brought up an image of Lieutenant Torres's graduation ceremony from the academy. When Torres finally completed her teaching tenure here, she left behind something remarkable. Not just the dozens of protocols named after her, or the countless stories that instructors still use to frighten first-year cadets. She left behind a fundamental change in how we approach warfare, problem-solving, and the very concept of possibility. The hologram faded completely, leaving just the natural light of the triple suns streaming through the windows. So here's your final lesson, cadets. The next time you encounter a species that seems primitive or limited, remember the humans. Remember that true advancement isn't just about technology or physical capabilities. It's about the ability to think differently, to adapt, to look at a coffee maker and see a potential weapon. I straightened my ceremonial sash one last time. Because somewhere out there right now, a human is probably doing something that will force us to rewrite our training manuals again. And honestly, I can't wait to see what it is. The lecture hall erupted in applause, but I raised my primary tentacle for silence. One last thing. Lieutenant Torres wanted me to tell any future classes that she's still waiting for someone to beat her obstacle course record. And yes, using the ventilation system as a shortcut is completely legal, as long as you bring your own hot sauce. As the cadets filed out of the hall, I couldn't help but notice several of them already forming discussion groups, their eyes bright with new possibilities. I caught fragments of their conversations, but what if we and has anyone ever tried? And my personal favorite, that's not technically against the rules. I sent a quick message to Amanda, just finished telling our story to the new batch. I think you've inspired another generation to question everything we thought we knew about warfare." Her reply came almost instantly excellent. "By the way, remember that coffee maker from Rigel 7? I just figured out how to turn it into a short-range teleporter. Want to help me test it?" I felt my scales ripple with both amusement and terror. Just another normal day in a galaxy that had learned to expect the unexpected from its most surprising members. The humans were here to stay, and the galaxy would never be the same. Thank the stars for that.